In case you missed it, I recently spent 6 months studying for the Nsca Cscs exam. This certification is pretty much known as one of the most challenging baseline level certifications out there. And when I say baseline, I don't mean simple. I simply mean that this is the certification that you're going to submit your CEUs or continuing education units to. And in this video, I want to share a bit of my experience as well as some of the things I did to help me pass on my first attempt. Now, even if you're not taking this specific exam, this video does have a number of just general study and organizational tips, so I encourage you to stick around. If you have not hit that subscribe button yet, please do so. I am crawling my way up to 100K and I would love your help to get there. So without further ado, let's jump on in. I actually want to start with why I even took this exam. So a quick background, I've been working in group fitness since 2016 and slowly transitioned into personal training from there. My original certification was with NASM. It was their NASM CPT, which I still think is a great intro cert if you're coming from pretty much nothing like I was. You know, I grew up dancing and I have a theater degree, so my knowledge definitely had a lot of gaps that needed to be filled. That's what she said. So fast forward to now, I wanted to get this specific cert for a number of reasons. First and foremost, it's very respected, and to be frank, I like being the best, or I at least like being my best. I do really pride myself on being educated, so this certification, you know, it made sense for me in that sense. Now, I do primarily work with general population, and this certification is much more geared toward athletes. So I wouldn't say by any means that this was necessary, but I do think, again, because I have a theater degree as my background and the NASM cert isn't as comprehensive as this, I feel like it did actually fill in a lot of gaps for me. Also, I won't even lie, I wanted to be able to put those letters next to my name. Another reason I wanted to get this cert is because not as many women have it. This has been changing a lot over recent years, but still the majority of people with this certification are men. And I simply wanted to be one of the women in the group. I don't know, like that's pretty much it. It's a very like high Barbie moment. And then the final reason, which I've said a number of times at this point, is that I do have a theater degree as my undergrad. So obviously there's just like the imposter syndrome of it all. I've always been a little self-conscious of my degree, even though, like, to be honest, I do think that having that degree gives me a leg up in a lot of other ways. But here's the kicker. In the next few years, NSCA is going to require a bachelor's degree. Right now, you do have to have a bachelor's degree to even sit for this exam, but in a few years, they are going to change it that you need a bachelor's degree in a relevant field to even sit for the exam. So I don't think having a degree in jazz hands qualifies. All right, now let's look at the timeline. So I gave myself 6 months to study for the exam, which I would say is like the longest you want to give yourself. Looking back, I could have gotten through this faster, but we're going to cover that when I talk about the mistakes that I made. So in terms of my timeline, I started with 2 chapters a week and I mapped all of this out in my Google Calendar. Then I went back and I actually used Matt Caruso's guide to do it all again. Matt Caruso is known as the Movement System on YouTube. Highly, highly recommend. We're going to talk about him again when we get to things that worked well. So like I said, I used his guide to go through the whole book again, and then I just spent the last 3.5 weeks reviewing and taking practice tests. So you can see this is where I was finishing out the chapters. I always took note of like how long Matt's lectures were going to be associated with each chapter, just so I knew how much time to block out. And then here's what I would do. At the beginning of the week, I would take a practice test for the first half of the exam. So you have like a like exercise science portion and then more of like the practical and applied section. So I would take one section on one day, one section on the next day, and then I would take note when I went through and I would see what did I get right, what did I get wrong, what was I feeling iffy about, and I would take notes along the way as I was taking the exams of just like what I was guessing, what I had no idea about, what I really just felt not confident in. And I would take all of those things, and the last 4 days of the week, I would split it up into scientific foundations. These are the things I need to look back up. Practical and applied. These are the things I need to look back up. I did have some flashcards, which we'll talk about in just a moment, of things that went well. I would pull 10 random flashcards to go through, and then any of the incorrect questions that I took on the exam, I would go through those. And I would just I had like a running note. I don't know if I have that anymore. I think I probably deleted it for good. But I had a running note where I would just like scroll through and re-look through the questions. And so I did this over the next 4 days of the week. I would give my brain a break on Sunday, and then I would repeat the whole process over again. So let's move into things that worked really well. I mean, this is something you actually need. So I wouldn't even call it like a hack or anything, but like you need the textbook. So I believe that they're quickly coming out with a 5th edition, but this is the Essentials of Strength Training and Conditioning, 4th edition. The 5th edition is just going to have like some updated studies, but basically you need the book. You need the book because that's where 90% of the exam questions are taken from. And then I would say 10% 10% is like just kind of things you should know as a coach, or even like more recent studies that have come out that haven't made it into the textbook. And while that can be a little bit frustrating, it is also, again, just supposed to weed out people who like have zero experience. This is meant to be a certification for like elite S&C or strength and conditioning coaches. Something else that worked well that we kind of already talked about, as I was going through the practice exams, I was strategically taking notes about what worked and what didn't work, or what I knew and what I didn't know. That way it was super easy for me after my practice exams just to divide everything up over the 4 days that I had to review, put it in my calendar, and then I could come back to it later. The next thing that worked really well was Matt Caruso's guide. Not only was it really, really helpful to just have someone talk through in a lecture style and like really break down what you actually need to know about each concept, since the book is pretty dense, I also found that Matt's practice tests and questions were the closest out of the different resources that I used to the actual exam questions. The next thing that worked really well were flashcards. I kept my flashcards. Look at this. This is a hefty bitch right here. I kept these flashcards literally just for this video. When I'm done filming this, they're going in the trash. It's triggering. So I started making the flashcards once I went through Matt's course, because he did a really good job of like, here's what you definitely need to know. And here are things where like you're way less likely to get a question on them. So anything that was like, I have to know this, and it's a little bit more recall, like protein recommendations for athletes. You have to know this. I put it on a flashcard. I'm also just the type of person who does better if I can verbalize and like repeat the information back. So having something on a flashcard that I literally just had to talk out was super helpful. And then the final resource that I used was Pocket Prep. I only used this right at the end, so I just paid for a month of like the unlimited subscription where you could take all of the practice tests. And even though I didn't find that the practice tests and questions were super similar to the ones on the actual exam, I thought they were great for recall. This was where I realized that I was really weak in my sports psychology, and I actually did have a number of questions on the exam of those. So I was really glad that it kind of filled in those blanks of things that maybe Matt's course didn't say were going to be as important. Pocket Prep kind of pointed out that I really didn't know them at all, and then by chance I had a good chunk of exam questions on them. So now let's move into the mistakes I made, and I would say I made two big mistakes. First thing I wish that I did, I wish that I had cut down my study time by overlapping Matt's course that I'd used and my studying through the textbook. So like I said, I went through the whole textbook first, and then I basically did it again with Matt's study course. I kind of wish that I had just done them at the same time, like watch the lecture and then read the chapter, or vice versa. Only because I did 2 chapters a week, so it took me quite a bit to get through the textbook the first round, and I just think that I could have shortened the entire experience. So if you don't want to take 6 months and you want to use a lot of the same resources as me, I would say you could probably cut it down to 4 very easily if you just overlap that. And then the other big mistake that I made, and this is like a real mistake, I did not learn the 60th percentiles. So essentially in the practical and applied portion of the exam, you're going to have a lot of questions, or let's start with this. You're going to have to know how to test athletes for certain movement qualities. So for example, if you're testing for power for, let's say, a basketball player, you're probably going to want to do a vertical jump test. So you not only need to understand how to run a vertical jump test in terms of what's the setup, how many attempts does the athlete get, what type of vertical jump test are you doing that makes the most sense for their sport, but then you're also supposed to know basically like what's expected of them based off of their sex, their age, whether they're a college athlete or a pro athlete, and then what would you do to improve that movement quality if it's not sufficient. So what you're expected to do is memorize the 60th percentiles, because that's going to give you basically a good idea when you get to the exam of like, oh, is this athlete, what is this athlete deficient at, and how are you going to like improve it, right? And I did not do that because I was just kind of like, there's no way I'm going to be able to remember that. I just kind of like from the beginning was like, I'm just going to hope I don't get a lot of questions on that. And let me tell you right now, you're going to get a lot of questions on that. You're going to get so many questions. It's like, here's athlete A, and they are a college woman who plays volleyball, and these are their stats in a number of different lifts and field tests. What are you going to do with them? And I literally in the exam was like shitting my pants. I was like, oh no. Oh, I fucked up. Oh, I fucked up so bad. I made it through. You don't get to know what you got right and wrong. It was truly a guessing game, a lot of like process of elimination. I could have saved myself a ton of stress if I had at least like learned a little bit of them. And I really barely tried, but I did pass, and that's all that matters. So learn your 60th percentiles, or at least attempt to, because that was a big mistake. So anyway, let's just move into some final thoughts. Again, I work with general population. I don't think that I needed to do this exam or get this certification, but it does feel really good to have pushed myself. I was actually just talking with another coach the other day who is interested in also going through this whole process. And one of the things she said to me was, I just really haven't been like in school, or I haven't pushed myself in that way for a long time, and I'm craving it. And I think that is a good lesson to learn. Like as a coach, we should be continuing to push ourselves and grow our knowledge base. I'm not saying it needs to be through a certification that doesn't necessarily 100% correlate with your client base, but I think she's right. Like it does feel really good to like push the boundaries of what your brain can do. And I do think, again, overall, it was the best decision for me, because I learned a lot of the basics through that NASM CPT, which again is much more introductory level than this is. And this filled in a lot of the blanks in the exercise science world. If you're thinking of getting this certification, but you have not really worked with people, I'm going to sit here really confidently and say, wait. Either wait or immediately try and start shadowing like an S&C coach. I really got saved on the practical and applied section where I didn't learn the 60th percentiles because of my coaching eye, because I have had so many years of coaching people in person, one-on-one, that I was able to fight my way through that section and actually pass. Those are just my 2 cents. Obviously, you can do whatever you want, but if, again, you have 0 experience coaching in person, one-on-one, not just like training yourself, I think you need to get some hands-on experience first. So hopefully this was helpful, whether you are looking to take the certification, take a different one, or if you're just somebody who likes learning about like different study and organizational tips. If you have any questions, please leave them down below, and I will see you all in the next one.